The wagon wheels groaned over the hard, cracked earth, each turn pulling Clara Whitmore deeper into a life she couldn't imagine. Her hands, wrapped in worn gloves, clutched a marriage contract. The paper was damp, not from the air, but from the sweat of her own fear. Across from her, another woman sat straight-backed, her eyes locked on the endless horizon. A second contract, identical to Clara's, trembled in her fingers. They had traveled for 3 days side by side, two strangers bound by the same desperate hope, speaking only in polite, empty words. The prairie dust was a living thing, swirling around them, coating their dresses, their skin, their futures. The wind tasted like iron. It tasted like an ending. "Redemption Creek ahead!" the driver called out, his voice as dry and raspy as the land itself. Clara's stomach twisted into a knot. Through the wagon's dusty flap, the town shimmered in the heat. A small cluster of wooden buildings, huddled together as if for protection against the vast, crushing emptiness. The other woman, Josephine, finally met her eyes. And in that one look, Clara saw her own reflection. The same hope, buried deep beneath a mountain of fear. It was the silent, perfect understanding of two women stepping off the edge of the world. The wagon lurched to a final jarring stop. "End of the line, ladies!" Clara's legs shook as she climbed down. The ground felt too solid, too real. Josephine followed, her movements graceful even in the dust, a hint of a finer world clinging to her like perfume. They stood on the town's main street, two mail-order brides, their entire lives packed into two trunks, each chasing a promise written in ink. Faces appeared in windows. Murmurs spread like a disease. Two of them, on the same day. Trouble's coming. Clara scanned the small crowd, searching for the face from the photograph. Samuel Morrison, a widower who had promised her a home, a life, in exchange for quiet companionship. Thin face, kind eyes, hair already turning gray. But he wasn't there. Beside her, Josephine's voice was a soft, nervous whisper. "Do you see a Mr. Theodore Banks?" Clara shook her head. "No, and I don't see Mr. Morrison either." The crowd's interest soured, and they drifted away, leaving the two women alone with their luggage and their rapidly dying hope. An old woman in a faded calico dress shuffled towards them, her face a roadmap of hard years. "You the brides?" she asked, her voice thin and reedy. "Yes, ma'am," Josephine answered, her voice trembling just slightly. "I'm here for Mr. Banks. Mrs. Whitmore is here for Mr. Morrison." The old woman's mouth twisted into a grimace of pity. "Oh, you poor things. Nobody told you, did they?" She paused, letting the silence hang. "Samuel Morrison was kicked in the head by a horse. We buried him 2 weeks ago." Clara's world stopped. The air left her lungs. "As for Theodore Banks," the woman continued, her voice flat, "he cleared out 6 days back, took every cent he had and his brother's wife with him. Headed for California." The words were hammer blows. Clara had sold everything she owned, endured the cruelty of her late husband's family, and traveled 2,000 miles into the empty heart of the country. For nothing. Beside her, Josephine let out a small, strangled gasp. "What are we supposed to do now?" she whispered. The old woman just shrugged. "That's between you and God, I suppose, but you'd best find shelter. The desert is no place for a woman alone after dark." She turned and shuffled away, leaving them in the ruins of their new lives. The town itself felt like a predator. Every window was an eye. Every door was a judgment. "We need a place to stay," Clara managed, the words catching in her throat. "Do you have any money?" Josephine asked. "I spent my last dollar on the wagon fare," Clara admitted. Josephine's silence was a confession of its own. They were broke, stranded. And then he appeared. He came from the direction of the stables, leading a powerful gray horse. Spurs chimed softly with each deliberate step. He was tall, broad-shouldered, a man who commanded space without trying. His dark hair was shadowed by a worn hat, his jaw rough with a new beard. He wore simple canvas trousers, a leather vest, and a gun belt that rested on his hip like it was a part of him. He stopped when he saw them, his eyes dark, steady, and holding a sorrow so deep it seemed to pull the light out of the air. "Ladies," he said, his voice a low rumble, shaped by wind and solitude. He tipped his hat. "You waiting on someone?" Clara couldn't speak. Something about this man, The quiet strength in his stance, the ghost of pain in his eyes locked the words in her chest. "We were," Josephine said, her voice regaining some of its composure. "It appears our arrangements have fallen through." The man's gaze swept over them, and Clara felt as if he could see everything. Their empty purses, their shattered hopes, their rising panic. "Sun's going down," he said simply. "It gets cold out here fast. You have a place to stay?" "No," Clara whispered. He paused, a flicker of some internal struggle crossing his face. Then he gave a single, decisive nod. "My ranch is an hour's ride north. It's not fancy, but it's warm, and it's safe. You can stay the night. Figure out your next move in the morning." "We couldn't possibly impose," Josephine started. "It's not an imposition," he cut her off, his tone firm. "It's survival, unless you'd rather take your chances with the coyotes." Clara looked at the sky. The sun was bleeding out behind the mountains, and the air already had a knife's edge to it. They had no choice. "Thank you, Mr. Carver, Luke Carver." He loaded their trunks onto his wagon as if they were filled with feathers. "Can either of you handle a team?" "I can," Clara said, the words surprising her. A bitter memory of her late husband, forcing her to learn the hard work he himself despised. One of the few useful things he'd ever taught her. Luke handed her the reins and mounted his gray horse. "Stay close. The trail gets rough after dark." And just like that, they were leaving Redemption Creek. Two women who had come seeking husbands and found only dust and despair. Following a silent stranger into the growing darkness, under a sky full of cold, sharp stars. Wolves howled in the distance, and Clara gripped the reins tighter, her eyes fixed on the broad, lonely back of Luke Carver. He had offered them shelter. He had offered them a chance. What neither of them knew was that he hadn't offered it out of kindness. He had offered it because he knew Samuel Morrison. And he knew Samuel Morrison's death was no accident. Luke Carver's ranch rose from the darkness like a ghost, a fortress of weathered pine logs and stone against the endless, starry sky. The howl of wolves was closer now, a chilling song that seemed to come from the surrounding hills themselves. Luke moved with a quiet, powerful grace, helping them down from the wagon, carrying their heavy trunks inside as if they were weightless. "Welcome to the Double C," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It's plain, but it's safe." The main room glowed, warmed by a large stone hearth, a rough-hewn table, shelves of worn books, a rifle resting above the mantel. Everything was clean, functional, and marked by a profound, crushing loneliness. There was no woman's touch here, not anymore. "Stew's on the fire," Luke said, stoking the embers. "Eat. I'll see to your things." He stepped back outside, leaving them alone in the crackling silence. Josephine was the first to speak, her voice a tense whisper as she pulled off her gloves. "I suppose we should introduce ourselves. I'm Josephine Hale from Boston." "Clara Whitmore," Clara replied, moving towards the hearth, grateful for something to do. "From Ohio." "And what brings a woman from Ohio to answer a matrimonial ad?" Josephine asked, her curiosity a sharp contrast to her elegant posture. Clara ladled stew into two wooden bowls, her voice steady. "My husband passed 2 years ago. His brother inherited the farm. He seemed to think he inherited me along with it. When I refused him, he made my life a living hell. The ad was my only way out." Josephine's gaze softened. "I'm sorry, for me it was different. My family has money, but they also have very firm ideas about a woman's place. I refused the suitors they chose for me. I embarrassed them. They were pushing me into a life that felt like a cage. I thought, out here, I could finally be free." She let out a small, bitter laugh. "Instead, I'm stranded." Luke returned, his presence filling the room. "Spare room's in the back," he said, nodding towards a door. "Was my sister's, before she married. It's yours for now." "You've been very kind," Clara said. "It's not kindness," Luke replied, taking his own bowl of stew. "It's just what's right. Can't leave two women to the wolves." They ate in silence, the fire crackling, the wind moaning outside. Clara watched him. His face was a mask of grief, his hands scarred from hard labor. But he moved with a gentleness that was at odds with his rugged appearance. He was a man carrying a heavy burden. Later in the small, clean room, Josephine whispered from the other cot, "He's hiding something. Some great sadness. Out here, Clara whispered back, most everyone is. She fell into a restless sleep and woke to the sound of the wind screaming. A dust storm had descended, a swirling wall of red dirt that blotted out the sun and turned the world into a howling chaos. Luke was already at the windows, securing the shutters. Storm came on fast, he said, his voice tight. We're trapped. Could be for days. They passed the time in a strange, suspended reality. Luke cleaned his guns. Josephine, finding his books, read aloud, her calm, cultured voice a strange comfort against the storm's fury. Clara found a basket of mending and stitched, the simple, repetitive motion a balm to her frayed nerves. You've been more than generous, Clara said, breaking a long silence. Most men would have just left us in town. Luke looked up from the rifle he was oiling. A shadow passed over his face. My mother taught me that a man's worth is in how he treats those who can't protect themselves. His voice roughened. I haven't always lived up to that, but I try. The storm raged on, imprisoning them together. They played cards by the firelight, their easy laughter a startling sound in the lonely cabin. Clara found herself watching the way Luke's eyes would linger on Josephine when she spoke of Boston, a flicker of something like longing in his gaze. But then he would look at Clara, and his expression would change. It wasn't longing. It was something deeper. Recognition, a shared understanding of loss. When the storm finally broke, the world was raw and clean. I'll take you both into town, Luke announced, saddling his horse. Find you work. It's not what you came for, but it's a start. By noon, Clara was sweeping floors and keeping books at Henderson's general store. Josephine was serving meals at the town's only restaurant. It was survival. As Luke left them, their trunks once again at their feet, Clara's quiet, "You saved us," was met with a shake of his head. You saved yourselves. I just opened the door. Weeks passed. Clara worked hard, enduring the whispers of the townspeople. Josephine bore the rough life of a waitress with a surprising grace. Luke came to town for supplies, his visits brief, his eyes holding a conflict he couldn't hide. Clara felt her heart stir whenever he spoke to her, and she saw the way Josephine's did too. The town saw it all. He's sweet on both of them, she heard a woman gossip at the store. That's a storm of a different kind, and it's coming. And then one night the storm broke. Luke found them both at the restaurant, his face grim. I need to talk to you, he said. He led them outside into the cold night air. I know this isn't fair to either of you. Josephine, you're like sunshine. You make me remember what it's like to hope for a future. But Clara, he turned to her, his voice dropping. You understand the past. You don't look at my scars and flinch. He ran a hand through his hair, his torment palpable. I don't know how to choose between the sun and the shade. Maybe you don't have to choose tonight, Clara said gently. But I do, he said, his eyes dark with a pain that had nothing to do with them. Because it's not just about my heart. It's about staying alive. Samuel Morrison didn't die from a horse kick. He was murdered. The same men who killed him are the ones who killed my wife and child 2 years ago. And I think they're coming back for me. The weeks after the Harvest Festival were a tightrope of tension. When Luke came to town, his visits were shadowed by a new, unspoken urgency. Clara and Josephine, once united in their misfortune, were now silent rivals, their friendship frayed by a quiet, desperate hope. One crisp October afternoon, Luke found Clara at the general store. His face was grim. Ride with me, he said, his voice low. It wasn't a request. He led her out to a quiet grove by a creek, the autumn leaves a carpet of gold at their feet. He didn't waste time. The men who killed my wife, he began, his voice flat and hard. They weren't just random outlaws, they worked for the railroad. They wanted my land because of the river that runs through it. They tried to scare me off. When I wouldn't sell, they engineered a rock slide. It was meant for me. But Mary and the baby, they were caught instead. Clara's heart ached for him. And Samuel Morrison? He found out what they'd done, Luke said, his jaw tight. He was collecting evidence against them. I think they killed him to shut him up. And now I'm the only one left who knows the truth. He finally looked at her, his eyes blazing with a cold fire. That's why I brought you and Josephine to the ranch. It wasn't just charity. I thought, I thought they wouldn't come after me if there were witnesses, if there were women in the house. The confession hung in the air between them. He had used them as a shield. I know it was wrong, he said, his voice rough with shame. But I was desperate. He ran a hand through his hair. And now I've put you both in terrible danger. Josephine, she's like a beacon, bright and beautiful. She draws attention. But you, Clara, you know how to be invisible. You know how to survive in the shadows. That's why I have to ask you to leave. For your own safety. His words were meant to protect her, but they felt like a rejection. He was choosing to protect the sunshine and asking the shadow to disappear. I can take care of myself, she said, her voice tight. The ride back was thick with things unsaid. As they neared the town, Josephine was waiting for them on the restaurant porch, her face pale. She had seen them ride out together. She knew something had shifted. The fragile balance had finally broken. That night, a stranger rode into Redemption Creek, a well-dressed man with polished boots and cold, calculating eyes. He didn't go to the saloon. He went straight to the telegraph office. An hour later, Josephine burst into the store, her face ashen. "It's my father," she whispered, clutching a telegram. "He sent a man to bring me home. He says I've shamed the family name, living out here alone. He says, he's having me declared unfit." Her voice trembled. "Unless I'm married." The word was a trap. Clara saw the desperate, calculating hope flare in Josephine's eyes. "Luke," Josephine breathed, "if he married me, my father would have no legal claim. I could stay. I could be free." Clara's heart felt like a stone in her chest. A marriage born of fear was just another kind of cage. That evening, Luke came to town, his face a thundercloud. He had heard the news. He found Josephine at the restaurant, her father's agent sitting at a nearby table, watching her every move. "He can't force you to go," Luke said, his voice a low growl. "He can if I'm declared incompetent," Josephine countered, her eyes pleading with him. "But not if I'm a married woman." The unspoken proposal hung between them. Luke looked from Josephine's desperate face to the cold-eyed man watching them from the corner. Then his gaze flickered across the street to the general store, where he knew Clara was watching. He was trapped. "We'll get you to safety," he said finally, his voice grim. "We'll figure this out." He snuck her out of town that night, hiding her in an old line shack high in the mountains. At dawn, he returned not with a ring, but with the circuit judge, a man with kind eyes and a firm grasp of frontier law. "Your father can roar all he wants back in Boston," the judge told a trembling Josephine. "But out here, a woman who supports herself has the right to choose her own path. He has no power over you." Relief washed over Josephine, so potent it was almost painful. She was free, truly free. The agent left town on the next stagecoach, his mission a failure. The people of Redemption Creek, who had once whispered about the mail-order brides, now saw Josephine in a new light. A woman of courage. A woman who had stood up to a powerful man and won. Winter passed. Spring arrived, painting the hills in wildflowers. Luke kept his distance from both of them, his internal battle a silent, solitary war. But Clara saw the way his eyes always found her in a crowded room. And she knew. One bright May morning, he rode into town, his jaw set with a new resolve. He went to Josephine first. Their conversation was brief, quiet. From across the street, Clara saw Josephine place a hand on his arm, a gesture of understanding, of friendship. Then she saw Josephine look towards the store and nod. Minutes later, Luke was standing before her, under the shade of the cottonwood trees. "Clara," he began, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "I can't offer you sunshine or a life without shadows. All I have is a broken-down ranch and a heart that's seen too much sorrow." He took her hands in his. "But it's a heart that loves you." Tears blurred Clara's vision. "Yes," she whispered. "Oh, Luke, yes." Their wedding was a simple affair. The whole town gathered to witness it. As Luke slid a simple gold band on her finger, a new legend was born in Redemption Creek. The story of the two mail-order brides who had both fallen for the same rugged cowboy. Josephine was there, her smile genuine, her eyes bright. When she hugged Clara, she whispered, "He chose right. You heal him." Her own path was clear now. With a loan from the bank and her own fierce determination, she was buying the restaurant. As Luke and Clara rode out of town towards the ranch, the life that was now theirs, Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. The prairie stretched before them, vast and full of promise. Two women had come to the West chasing a dream. One had found love, the other had found freedom, and both had found themselves. But the railroad hadn't forgotten about Luke Carver's land, and the man who killed his first wife was still out there. Their story wasn't over. The deadliest storm was yet to come. Life on the Double C Ranch was a quiet kind of healing. The silence that had once felt like a wound was now filled with the small, comforting sounds of a shared life. The soft murmur of their voices by the fire at night, the rhythmic scrape of Clara's knife-chopping vegetables, the steady hammer of Luke repairing the world, piece by piece. He was a man rediscovering how to live. She was a woman who had finally found a place to breathe. They didn't talk about their pasts. They didn't need to. Their scars spoke for them, a silent language of shared understanding. But the outside world has a way of breaking down doors. One afternoon, a rider approached the ranch. It was the town sheriff, his face grim. "Luke, there's trouble. A man's been asking questions in town, an Easterner. Says he's a land surveyor for the railroad." Luke's face hardened. "He's no surveyor." "I know," the sheriff said. "He's got the eyes of a wolf, and he was asking about you, about your first wife." The peace was shattered. That night, the silence in the cabin was different. It was heavy, watchful. "They're back," Luke said, his voice flat. "They won't make the same mistake twice. This time they'll come to finish the job." "Then we won't be here," Clara said, her voice firm. He looked at her, surprised. "You want to run?" "I don't want to die," she countered. "This isn't just about your land anymore, Luke. It's about our life. We can go somewhere else. Start over where no one knows our name." His jaw tightened. "This is my home. I buried my wife and child on that hill. I won't let them drive me off." "They're already dead," Clara cried, her voice breaking. "We're not. Don't you see? Staying here isn't honoring them. It's letting the same evil that took them take us too." Her words hit him harder than any fist. He stared at her, seeing not a timid mail-order bride, but a fierce survivor, a woman who had clawed her way to a new life and refused to let it be stolen. The next day, two more strangers rode into town. They weren't asking questions. They were buying up debt, calling in loans, squeezing the small ranchers and business owners of Redemption Creek. It was a new kind of attack, slower, quieter, but just as deadly. The railroad was trying to starve the town into submission. Josephine was the first to feel the pressure. The bank suddenly, under new management, called in the loan on her restaurant. She had 3 days to pay it in full or lose everything. She came to the ranch that night, her pride stripped away, her eyes wide with fear. "They're trying to ruin me, Luke. They know I'm your friend. They're trying to isolate you." They were trapped. If Luke stayed and fought, he risked Clara's life. If he ran, the railroad would not only take his land, they would destroy the town and the only friends they had. That night, as Luke stood staring out at the dark, silent hills, Clara came to him. She didn't have to ask what he was thinking. She could feel the war raging inside him. "You said your mother taught you a man's worth is in how he treats those who can't protect themselves," she said softly, her hand finding his. "That includes you, Luke. You don't have to carry this alone." He turned to her, the anguish in his eyes raw and exposed. "I don't know what to do, Clara. I can't lose you too." "You won't," she said, her voice filled with a strength that seemed to flow into him. "Because we're not going to fight their way. We're going to fight ours." The next morning, Luke and Clara rode into town. But they didn't go to the sheriff's office. They went to the land office. Clara had spent the night poring over the old maps and property deeds she'd organized at the general store. And she had found something, a mistake, an oversight from an old Spanish land grant decades ago. A single crucial section of land, right in the middle of the railroad's proposed route, had never been officially signed over to the territorial government. It was still legally unowned land. "If we file a claim on it," Clara explained, her voice trembling with excitement, "it will stop them in their tracks. They can't build across land they don't have the rights to. But there was a catch. To file a claim, they needed money, more money than they had. That's when Josephine arrived, her face set with a new determination. I may have lost my restaurant, she said, pulling a velvet pouch from her reticule. But I haven't lost everything. My family may have disowned me, but they couldn't touch the inheritance my grandmother left me. She emptied a cascade of jewels onto the counter. Will this be enough? It was more than enough. By noon, the claim was filed. The railroad's path was blocked. They had won, or so they thought. That evening, the railroad's surveyor paid them a visit at the ranch. He didn't come with guns. He came with a smile and an offer. You're clever, Mrs. Carver, he said to Clara, his eyes cold as a snake's. But you've only delayed the inevitable. We will get that land, one way or another. He turned to Luke. But my employers are reasonable men. They're willing to buy your new claim and your ranch for a price that would allow you and your lovely wife to disappear and live very comfortably. We're not for sale, Luke said, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. The man's smile widened. A pity. I was hoping you'd be reasonable. He paused at the door. You should know, your first wife, Mary, her death was a tragic accident, but accidents can be arranged. It would be a shame if your new wife were to meet a similar fate. The threat was unmistakable. They hadn't won. They had just painted a target on Clara's back. They didn't sleep that night. They sat by the fire, the weight of the railroad's threat pressing down on them. He was right, Luke said, his voice a hoarse whisper. I've put you in danger. We have to leave. No, Clara said, her voice fierce. We don't run. Not anymore. This is our home. She looked at him, her eyes blazing. You said Samuel Morrison was collecting evidence. Did you ever find it? Luke shook his head. His place was ransacked after he died. Whatever he had, they took it. Are you sure? Clara pressed. Think, Luke. Did he ever mention a hiding place? A code? Anything? Luke was silent for a long time. Then his eyes widened. The church, he breathed. He was the church deacon. He said he kept the town's real history safe, right under God's nose. They rode for town before dawn. The church was cold and empty, smelling of old wood and forgotten hymns. They searched everywhere, under floorboards, behind the altar, in the pages of the heavy pulpit Bible. Nothing. Clara was ready to give up when her hand brushed against a loose stone in the hearth of the church's small office. She pried it open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a leather-bound ledger. It was Samuel Morrison's. And it was a record of every crime the railroad had committed in the territory. Extortion, bribery, murder. It was all there. Names, dates, amounts paid. It was enough to bring them down, to expose the corruption that reached all the way to the territorial governor. They had the proof. They had the weapon they needed to finally win. But as they stepped out of the church into the pale morning light, they found themselves surrounded. The railroad agent stood there, a smug smile on his face, flanked by a dozen hired guns. I knew you were smart, the agent said, holding out his hand. Now be smart enough to hand that over. It was over. They were trapped. But then another voice cut through the morning air. I don't think so. Sheriff Palmer stepped out of his office, a shotgun resting in the crook of his arm. Behind him stood the men of Redemption Creek, ranchers, blacksmiths, store owners, men who had finally had enough of being bullied. This is our town, the sheriff said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority, and you are not welcome here. The agent laughed. You and what army? This one, another voice said. Josephine Hale stood on the porch of the restaurant, and beside her was a man Clara had never seen before. A man in a tailored suit with an air of power that dwarfed the railroad agents. This is my lawyer, Josephine announced, her voice clear and strong. He's come all the way from Boston, and he's brought with him an injunction from a federal judge. It seems my father's business partners in the railroad have been engaging in some illegal practices. Their assets have been frozen, including the funds they were using to pay you. The hired guns exchanged nervous glances. The agent's face went white. He was a wolf who had just lost his teeth. The fight was over before it even began. Without money or power, The agent and his men were just outlaws. The sheriff and the townsmen disarmed them without a single shot being fired. Justice, it turned out, sometimes came not with a bang, but with the stroke of a pen. In the aftermath, Redemption Creek was a town transformed. With the railroad's corruption exposed, a new future was possible. Josephine, now a respected and wealthy businesswoman, led the charge, investing in the town, helping to build a school and a proper doctor's office. She had found her freedom, not in a husband, but in her own strength. Clara and Luke returned to the ranch, the ledger safe in the hands of the law. The shadows of the past had finally been banished. They stood on the porch of the home they had fought for, the prairie stretching before them, peaceful and golden in the afternoon sun. "It's over," Luke said, his voice filled with a wonder he hadn't felt in years. He pulled Clara into his arms. "It's finally over." "No," Clara said, smiling up at him. "This is just the beginning." Two mail-order brides had come west, seeking a new life. One found her fortune and her freedom. The other found a home in the heart of a lonely rancher. They had faced down storms, both real and threatened, and had discovered that the truest redemption isn't something you find in a place, but something you build together, with courage and with love. What do you think would have happened if Clara hadn't found that ledger? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of love and justice on the frontier, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button for more tales from the Wild West. Thanks for watching.